order the November 23rd, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission Working Group. Ms. Cook, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. O'Connor?
Present.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Ms. Leverns?
Here.
Ms. Leverns is also an at-large member. Mr. Haldeman?
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Polster?
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Dr. Rose?
Here.
Dr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Ms. Knoll?
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Kropp?
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and is chair of the Planning Commission. Ms. Wortman?
Here.
Ms. Wortman represents the Community Participation Team, and we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. And just again, there's a couple repetitive reminders coming up. One is for the raise hand icon and to unmute yourself when you are ready to speak. At this point, I'll turn it back to Ellen to introduce staff and the consultant team.
Rich, you forgot the resolution.
Oh, no, I have that as the next item on the agenda unless it got juggled around. But yeah, my copy has Ellen introducing the staff, but I could do the resolution now if that'd be better, Ellen.
Certainly, yeah. I'd be glad to do the introduction after the resolution.
Okay. In that case, we will jump to the resolution that's in your packets. And to summarize, on September the 8th, 2020, the board readopted the continuity of government ordinance, which under certain circumstances permits this committee to conduct today's meeting by electronic or telephonic means without a quorum of members physically present. May I have a motion to adopt that resolution for this afternoon's meeting?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? All right, thank you. And thanks for the reminder, Frank. And I'll now turn it over to Ellen to introduce the staff and consultants.
Great, thank you. Yes, my name is Ellen Cook. I'm a principal planner, and joining me today from James City County are Paul Holt, Tammy Rosario, Jose Ribeiro, Tori Haynes, Brett Meadows, Vaughn Pollard, Marion Payne, John Reisinger, and Alex Berg. Also joining us are our partners in this comprehensive plan update, our consultants, Vlad Gavrilovic and Todd Gordon from EPRPC. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, I'll mention that although we don't have a dedicated public comment period, we do offer the public an opportunity to submit comments either through emails or voicemails or other communications. Ellen, did we have any submissions?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you. All right. We next move to approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, or other changes? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? All right. Thank you all. We'll now roll into the housing chapter materials and turn it over to staff to kick this one off.
Hi, good evening. My name is Brett Meadows, and I'm a planner with Community Development Department. With me tonight is my planning colleague, John Reisinger, and Vaughn Pollard and Marion Payne of Neighborhood Development. We'll be presenting draft materials from the housing chapter. As with other chapters, we know you may have questions. Please reserve those until the end of the presentation, and we'll be sure to check in with everyone. Next slide. Today, we'll look at highlights from the technical report and a summary of the community guidance received to date. We'll also highlight key points from briefing papers on housing authorities and short-term rentals. Finally, we'll touch base on existing GSAs from the current adopted comprehensive plan. Next slide. We'll jump into the technical report highlights. Many of these topics could and have filled their own presentations, so we'll keep that in mind, but these are brief summaries rather than the nitty-gritty details covered within the technical report and within other reports and research. We'll begin with housing trends. Housing units in James City County are predominantly single family. The percentage of home ownership in the county is higher than our neighboring jurisdictions and higher than the region or state averages. Next slide, please. It should be noted that the 2019 Workforce Housing Task Force report provides much of the background and guidance to this housing technical report. The task force report found several key issues of housing affordability within the county. For example, the incomes of many workers in the county were insufficient to afford the average home prices and average rents in the county. Furthermore, the proportion of households experiencing housing cost burdens is increasing among both renters and among owners who own their own homes free and clear. More than 8,000 households were cost burdened in 2017, accounting for 30% of all households in the county. Next slide, please. Based on wage and housing data, it is likely that some workers in the county reside elsewhere because they cannot find appropriate affordable housing closer to their jobs in the county. The data shows that the earnings provided by the majority of the county's jobs are not sufficient to provide working families with abundant housing options in the county, and there's a significant deficit of housing affordable to lower income workers. Next slide, please. To make housing recommendations, the Workforce Housing Task Force developed 4 guiding principles. Number 1, workers in the county should be able to afford to live in the county if they choose. The county should promote strategies that create and sustain mixed income neighborhoods. Creating a range of attainable housing options in the county requires partnerships among public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And the county solutions for workforce housing should be designed to respect the county's unique natural, historic, and cultural resources. Next slide, please. The Workforce Housing Task Force offered recommendations for improving housing availability and affordability in 4 categories of production and preservation strategies. These were housing preservation, housing production, housing access, and funding. Next slide. The Workforce Housing Task Force guidance for new residential development is to offer housing that addresses those with incomes between 30 and 100% of the area median income. Offer housing at a range of income levels that is a good quality, and offer housing that is located near multimodal transportation connections to job centers, schools, and other public facilities, shopping areas, and recreation amenities. Next slide. The Workforce Housing Task Force report recommended designation of revitalization or rehabilitation zones to allow the county, private, and nonprofit developers to take advantage of funding offered to improve housing and neighborhood conditions in the county. Next slide, please. A discussion about housing is not complete without the inclusion of homelessness. Counting the number of people suffering from homelessness is difficult because different programs and agencies define homelessness differently. Furthermore, some people suffering from homelessness want to remain anonymous, thereby avoiding situations where they may be counted. Next slide, please. However, with that background, recent point-in-time attempts at counting those suffering from homelessness in the Peninsula region showed that James City County had the 3rd highest homeless population on the peninsula. People suffering from homelessness in the county may find shelter operated by nonprofits or in hotel rooms paid for by nonprofits. Next slide, please. As of 2020, housing administers 2 programs that serve people suffering from homelessness and those at risk of becoming homeless. The Virginia Homeless Solutions Program aims to rapidly rehouse people suffering from homelessness or those that would otherwise be homeless without this assistance. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program aims to provide permanent rental assistance to those earning below 50% area median income. Next slide, please. Furthermore, housing coordinates with several nonprofits to serve the population at risk of homelessness. Programs offer transitional housing to the temporarily displaced, the chronically homeless, young adults who have aged out of foster care systems, and victims of domestic violence. In addition to programs and approaches through nonprofit organizations, the county participates in regional cooperation with other jurisdictions. Seniors, next slide, please. Seniors are another key demographic with specific housing needs. As of 2018, approximately 24% of the county's population was 65 years and older. The Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia projects this segment to grow at a faster rate and make up a larger proportion of the population within the county compared to the city of Williamsburg, York County, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Next slide, please. In James City County, senior housing options vary. There's a mix of active senior adult communities, assisted living facilities, and a number of nursing homes. In addition to these, seniors may prefer to live and age in their own homes, a concept known as aging in place. There are a range of tools and approaches that can aid aging in place, with an important one being the use of universal design. Universal design promotes the design of products and environments to be used by as many ages and abilities as possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Next slide, please. The county has made some strides toward addressing senior-related housing issues through revisions to the zoning ordinance. Revisions have addressed accessory dwellings, clarified terminology for permitting purposes, and added universal design guidelines as an option for density bonuses. Next slide, please. Housing and the Neighborhood Development Division of the Community Development Department manage neighborhood revitalization programs that address critical housing production, as well as address improvements to neighborhood infrastructure. Next slide. Next. Funding for these projects comes from local, state, and federal sources, primarily the competitive Community Development Block Grant Program administered by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. Programs include assistance for home ownership and home buying, assistance for housing quality and housing repair, rental assistance, homelessness prevention, education, and grants. Next slide, please. Specific programs that have been implemented include the Neighbors Drive from 2014 to 2019, the Rural Homeowner Housing Rehabilitation Program in 2017, and the Scattered Site Housing Rehabilitation Program funded for 2019 through 2022. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. No, you are correct. I apologize. If we can reverse one. The county also works with nonprofit agencies within the county to provide housing services. Next slide. Moving from the technical report highlights to community guidance. The community guidance document summarizes the public input related to the housing chapter that has been received to date. This slide shows some of the input received so far. A second round of community engagement has recently wrapped up, and a third round of community engagement is planned for January 2021. As a result of the upcoming community meetings become available, staff will update the community guidance document for for review by the Planning Commission Working Group. It is intended that a summary of all the community guidance will be included within the chapter text for the final version. Next slide, please. Next, we'll discuss the Housing Authority briefing paper. This paper provides background on the history and purposes of public housing authorities and specifically provides consideration for redevelopment and housing authorities under the Code of Virginia. Next slide, please. The briefing paper provides reference to funding opportunities and limitations available for housing authorities. Of note, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development does not provide funding for new developments. The county budget would remain the primary source of funding for housing, and there are untapped sources of funding, including tax credits and bonds. Next slide, please. The paper also addresses considerations for the powers and limitations of a housing authority to address different housing issues in relation to how a county may address similar housing issues without a housing authority. Of note, the task force did not include creating a housing authority among its recommendations. Next slide, please. Staff has also prepared a short-term rentals briefing paper to provide some background information about short-term rentals, including the current process for evaluating applications in the county. Analysis includes possible direct economic effects and the possible impact on housing affordability. Next slide, please. It should be noted that research on the impacts of short-term rentals on affordable housing find there are some effects on cost and availability of on long-term rentals and home ownership. Factors affecting housing costs include the percentage of homes that are owner-occupied, the number of tourist attractions in an area, and the number of existing vacation homes. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission Working Group memo for tonight's meeting asked members to fill out the questionnaire at the end of the briefing paper and send them to the staff in advance of the meeting. Staff have compiled responses received thus far and will continue to compile those responses. Later on this evening, we'll have a chance to discuss the briefing paper after the presentation. Next slide, please. As with other chapters reviewed so far, staff has not revised the goals, the existing goals, strategies, and actions at this point. We are currently examining potential revisions and have tentatively identified some areas for updates. Members of the Planning Commission Working Group are welcome to provide initial suggestions and comments. Next slide, please. Now we'll open it up for questions and comments. We would like to focus on the technical report first and then work our way through to each individual briefing paper. With that, I'll open the floor to comments, and thank you for listening.
Mr. Haldeman.
Hi. Thanks, Brett. Nice job. On page H3 of the technical report, there are 4 bullets at the bottom of the page. The first bullet states the incomes of many workers in the county, even workers who are advanced in their occupations or who share rent with another person, were insufficient to afford to buy or even rent a home in the county at the average home prices and average rents cited in the task force report. I don't think that's the problem. There are a lot of people who can't buy something at an average price. The average is the average, and people have average incomes and lower incomes and higher incomes, and so incomes are average and the housing prices are average. It's the dispersion that's the issue. And so you're never going to have a situation where everybody in the county can afford housing or anything else at the average. and that's not a problem. As long as people can afford decent housing along the spectrum from low to high, then you don't have a problem. And it's where people can't afford a decent house or can't find a decent house at any price. That's the real problem, in my opinion. And so again, it's the dispersion around the mean, not the mean itself. And in fact, the last time I looked at this, which was a year and a half ago, the median, the AMI, the average median income for this region, was exactly the amount needed to buy a home at the average median cost in James City County. So it wasn't that the average worker couldn't afford the average home; they could. It's that the curve diverges as you go down, and the income curve unfortunately declines much faster than the housing cost curve, and therein lies the problem. So that's number one. Where am I here? Oh, number 4. Darn. Sorry. Number 4. What did I have to say? Yeah. Here's. In fact, this is exactly the point I was making earlier. Number 4, there is a significant deficit of housing affordable to lower income workers below 50% of the area median income in the county. The data shows, it should be data show, that the majority of the county's jobs provide insufficient income to allow working. The data also shows the majority provide insufficient income to allow working families many housings. Yeah, I don't think that's, the second sentence is true. A majority of county jobs aren't low-income jobs. I don't think. I'll go back to my Workforce Housing Task Force report, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. So those 2 bullets, I think, need a little work. And that's it for me.
Any discussion from staff on Jack's points there?
Rich, can I just jump in on that for a second?
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Actually, there was a table in the Workforce Housing Task Force report that showed that there were only, I don't know, 2 jobs or something like that. Let me see if I can find it. That allowed, hang on a minute.
I think it's on page 9.
It's page 11. Only 2 of the top 10 occupations pay enough for a single earner to afford the median rent in James City County. These are also the only 2 occupations that allow employees to afford median owner costs, but only when those employees are earning in the 90th percentile or doubled up. So there was, and this housing affordability table indicated the top 10 occupations in the county and whether those occupations paid enough to afford housing. So I just wanted to jump in on that.
Thank you, Jenny.
This is
Oh, no,
Ellen.
okay, go ahead, Ellen. Yep.
Oh, apologies. I was just going to say that the text here was staff's attempt to, there was such a lot of great data in the Workforce Housing Task Force report, and all of this is intended as to succinctly summarize some of the key information, but certainly we're glad to go back and look at the language we've used here and make sure it's accurately conveying the data that's in the task force report. So if there are any errors in translation, like I said, we're glad to go back and relook at that and reword things.
Thank you, Ellen. Frank, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to say that I absolutely agree with Jack and his comment. And I think it's even narrow in that in terms of it's not the procurement of a house so much as rental units and the availability by income. And I suggested to Brett in my comment that we really don't talk about the rental market at all. And so what I referred him to was something that was in the previous study for the housing needs assessment. And there was a chart in there that I'm suggesting that if you could update it for the current statistics, and I've taken a look at those and they haven't changed too much, is you see in the very low income that the number of rentals was 238 at the time with a demand of 2,472 households. And the same thing was true for the low and the moderate. And the point of the chart, when you looked at it from upper, middle, moderate, low, and very low in terms of incomes and the number of households that are in those categories, is that there isn't enough affordable housing. The demand exceeds the supply. And so the reason that I thought that we ought to at least look at the rental, and it goes to the issue that's in the land use of R5 high density, is that we don't have in the right locations in the county that type of housing capability, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Jack, did you have another comment?
I did, and then I was just back to Jenny's point. She's right about that table. I guess a majority of the types of jobs don't pay enough, but a majority of the number of jobs do. So I don't know if I made that clear, but that table that Jenny pointed out with 10 different job categories on it, a majority of those job categories do not pay enough, or at least they didn't. And so if that's how you interpret that bullet number 4, then that's accurate. But if you add up all the jobs in the county, a majority of those jobs pay enough to have people live here, whether in rental or owner-occupied homes.
So I gather, just for clarification, there's a distinction between the number of jobs that have an acceptable level of income versus where the vast majority of employees fall within the job, say lower paying, maybe landscape or garden workers or folks like that. So while the categories of jobs, most of them are sufficient income-wise, the employee base has a higher number in those lower paying jobs. Is that essentially?
Yeah, I think that's right. In bullet number 4, the first sentence is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And, there's a significant deficit of housing affordable to lower income housing, those below 50% of area median income in the county. That I don't think anybody questions that. It's the second part that but that's not, the second part of that isn't so important. Bullet number 1 I thought was important. And so I wanted to point it out. I have several others that are not specific to points made in this, but are specific to the Workforce Housing Task Force report that I sent around to everybody last Friday, I think. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this is the time to bring those up, but I'll, whenever anybody wants to.
Well, I think we're all right. I don't see any other hands on the technical report. So if you wanted to run through a couple of your other points, Jack, I think that's fine.
Thank you. The big point to me that doesn't have an answer. I'm great at pointing out problems and not so great at pointing out solutions, but we can build all the affordable housing we want in James City County. How do you know it's going to go to James City County workers? Mm-hmm. And, we've talked about this before in specific applications at the Planning Commission, and I just don't think there's an answer. A lot of the higher density homes that have been built in the last 15 or 20 years, and you can cite a lot of them, have been built right on the entrance ramp of I-64 or 199, and the better paying jobs are someplace else. And so we're providing workforce housing for workers in other counties or cities. And at the same time, they're bidding up the price of workforce housing, making it even harder for our own workers to find it. And the Workforce Housing Task Force never came up with an answer to that, because I don't think probably there is one. The other point I made out, there's the state government passed a significant increase in the hourly minimum wage last year. Now, because of the pandemic, when they went back into session this August, they postponed implementation of it. It was supposed to start in May of 21, and I think it's not going to start until January of 22 or something. I'm not sure about, but they didn't change the amount, and it's going to be a 30% increase. And in fact, it's going to double over a 5-year period. It's going to go from $7.25 to $15. So that table that Ginny referenced is already archaic, because all of those jobs, two things are going to happen. Number one, the people who keep their jobs are going to earn a lot more money. And number two, a lot of those people are going to lose their jobs because there are employers in James City County who can't afford $15 an hour. And they're either going to go out of business or they're going to replace those jobs with technology, one or the other. Mm-hmm. And I don't know which, and I don't know to what extent, but this is going to have. And then I also pointed out in my paper that Joe Biden has a fairly significant program to boost low-income housing. Down payment tax credits and first-time buyer credits and child independent care credits and on and on. Now, proposing it and executing it are two different things. It's not the law yet, unlike the minimum wage in Virginia. But it's that. The other thing I pointed out to the Workforce Housing Task Force that never got corrected is the top of that table on number 11 was military. And the military has a housing allowance for people who live off base that is not included in that income that the Workforce Housing Task Force used in that table, and so on and on and on.
Just to back up a bit, so that's for sure, Jack, that the housing allowance, I know that is considered a separate pay benefit. So the aggregate that they were looking at was strictly the basic pay for that particular rank, as opposed to whether they lived on or off base or post. Is that?
Yes, that was my understanding.
Okay, because that could have a significant impact.
Yeah, but you would know.
You're exactly right.
You would know, that's for sure. The other things that we've pointed out is there's a contradiction between the goal of protecting the rural and historic ambience of James City County and building more affordable housing. And that's easy enough there's a compromise that can be reached there, but it's worth pointing out anyways. There's a cost to affordable housing, and that's one of the questions that staff came up with for the next round of community outreach is, are you willing to either see taxes increase or other budget items decrease to pay for affordable housing, because it can be significant. Much of the mitigation we've had so far has been with other people's money, but to build a significant number of affordable homes is going to cost James City County taxpayers money. There's a discussion of seniors in this plan, rightly so. But just as there's never been a goal to suburbanize James City County, there's never been a stated goal to turn James City County into a retirement community, which it's becoming. I'm here to tell you, because that's why I'm here. And it's neither good nor bad. as the paper points out, there's a significant impact to having a large number of older people. There are health issues, there are transportation issues, there's housing issues, there's all kinds of things, I guess, that you get involved with. So I think somewhere in here should be a statement that says James City County is becoming a retirement community, and we're all okay with that. But we're going to need to build more assisted living and more CCRCs, and we're going to have to expand hospital facilities and the like, and try to figure out some kind of transportation issues. You can age at home, which I hope to do, but you're still going to have to get around. And how do you do that? There's a whole litany of issues to taking care of old people. And if we're going to do that, it should be part of the plan, I think, and as in a stated part. And there's two parts to it, too. I'm sorry for monopolizing the time here, but one part is people who live here age. They just become old, and there you are. And then there are other people who age someplace else and decide this would be a nice place to come for their final chapter. And there's not a lot you can do about the first example, but do you want to encourage the second example? A big part of the task force's plan was the housing opportunity policy gave certain benefits to builders who would build housing affordable to 30 to 120% of AMI. And that 120% has to come down. There's no reason to give incentives, particularly not density incentives, to build homes affordable to somebody making 120% of AMI. That's almost $100,000 a year. That's not low income by anybody's definition. So I think the Workforce Housing Task Force came up with 30 to 100%. I would even say 30 to 80%. But I'm glad to see that that's so there.
Thank you, Jack. And I see Ginny has her hand up. She was probably going to comment on one of your points, so I'll turn to her.
Thank you. Actually, no, there was another point that I didn't put in the comments that I circulated, which is the lack of connection in this chapter with the economic development chapter. The need for housing for people with low incomes is tied greatly to the fact that we're dominated by travel and tourism industry, restaurant workers, hotel workers, that kind of stuff, healthcare workers. If we had better paying jobs, we wouldn't need as much, perhaps, affordable housing. And I just think that there ought to be, the connection should be made in one place or the other, or both, that the kind of housing that we need is tied to the kind of economy that we have and what its base is. And maybe I missed it, but I didn't see it anyplace. And that was my comment.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, it's me again. I neglected one, and I think this is from an article I read last year from the organization called Bipartisan Policy Center. I don't know what that is, but anyways, it says seniors demand housing, but they also contribute to an important and growing share of the housing supply. Among adults entering their 60s, the pace of household dissolution begins to exceed that of household creation, meaning that this cohort releases more housing units into the supply than it absorbs. Just as the baby boom will swell the number of seniors in the next 2 decades, it will also swell the number of dwellings released into the housing market over the next 4 decades, creating new challenges and opportunities for housing policy. And they say this is going to be most highly felt in the Northeast and the Midwest. But if James City County is aging quickly it's going to hit here too. One of the things they suggested that we do is to change the zoning definition of family, so that as people age, maybe if you have two widows or two widowers or something, they can move in together and share a home. That gets into affordability and so forth. But you can't do that in some parts of James City County now. I guess you have to be a family to live together in some of the housing districts. So that might be something we want to investigate.
That's an interesting point.
Well, I think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Rich, it's Tim. I was going to say, Paul or Ellen can correct this, but I think right now our ordinance defines a family as being, I don't remember if it was 4 or 5 unrelated folks living together.
Oh, good.
So I think that's pretty broad. But to your point, Jack, I think one of the challenges that you're bringing up is slightly different for us, because when we look at, when you look at the housing stock that's out there, that a vast number of our retirees are occupying, that's not what our millennials and our Gen X's and Gen Z's are looking for. They're not looking for a $600,000 home on a 3/4 of an acre lot. And I think that's where part of our housing challenges will be, is the large homes, the large lots, the age-restricted communities. And that's not what the housing desires are going to be moving forward.
Thank you, Tim. And I saw Vaughn Poller has a comment on some of these statements. So, Vaughn, thank you for making yourself available this afternoon, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, my pleasure, Rich. Thank you. Just to comment on a couple of Jack's statements. One of the issues with the housing stock is, as Tim mentioned, is that because of when the growth in the housing stock in the county occurred, which began primarily in the late 80s, boost in the 90s, and a spurt in the aughts, our stock isn't really configured. And part of what we're dealing with is that we don't have the filter down housing, which is what's really missing from the market, which is why, as Tim pointed out, when those people who are elderly, when that housing stock is released, it tends to be of a particular type and doesn't necessarily meet the need for starter houses or families who are just in the child production era of their lives. So one of the reasons why our programs are looking at preserving the existing older housing stock, which does meet the typical definition of a starter house, is so that we can retain that part of the housing stock in the overall stock, but also to look at production of moderate sized and priced housing. It's somewhat a quirk of how the county developed. And I think the other thing, Jack, to the comment about a number of multifamily structures being constructed near our highway intersections, I think a number of the ones that we see aren't actually in the county. I can think of one that's been approved that's near the Croker intersection, but I'm not thinking of the others that are in the county near intersections.
Well, most of Newtown and Settlers Market, they're not all low-income housing. I didn't mean to say they were, but they're higher density, probably targeted toward younger people. But it's very easy to get onto 199 from there, and from 199 it's very easy to get onto 64, and 64 has just been widened, and on and on.
I take your point.
You're right. The quarter path is another example. That's in Williamsburg, and we had the developer of Quarter Path on our Workforce Housing Task Force report, and he just shrugged his shoulders. He said they advertise very heavily and down the peninsula. and you would think that a lot of those people would want to work at Riverside Hospital, and maybe some of them do, but a lot of them just hop right on I-64 and a brand new 6-lane highway, and off they go. And yeah, not all of them, absolutely not. I mean, Forest Heights and so forth, and others, Forest Glen are not right on the highways, but a lot of them are. And so.
I think the other point I'd like to make is that with respect to providing housing for seniors, I think a focus from the county policy has been looking at those low and moderate income seniors, because we do have that population that does live here, but are going to find it hard to maintain a household here as they age. And so I think part of our focus has been to look at those properties like the Parker View that was constructed in the aughts. And we find that there's a need for more of that type of housing. And as people, again, move into a supportive housing for elderly, they free up that housing that they'll leave that's more moderately priced and sized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I just think if we should have some statement of intent toward the elderly, that it is the policy to attract more from outside of James City County, or it's the policy to make sure we accommodate people who already live in James City County, but who reach an age where they need to change their living arrangements for one reason or another, having to do with aging.
Okay, and so that's a recommendation, and actually that probably should be touched on in the demographics section as well as in the housing and maybe some others. And
I feel the same way about turning this into a suburb, but there is no goal. There's never been a goal to turn this into a suburb of any place else. It just happened. And if it's going to continue to happen, which it probably will, we should, there should be, it is the policy of James City County to become a suburb of Newport News and York County and New Kent, Richmond, or wherever.
All right. I don't see any other hands on the technical report, so we can go into the position papers that were submitted. And I want to compliment staff on our packet this go around. There was a wealth of information in there. And if you don't mind me just asking, I was particularly, since I had mentioned the idea of a housing authority at our May meeting, I was very interested in the content of that paper. And there were obviously a lot of things I was not aware of. For example, that a housing authority would not report to the county administrator and that they would do administrative reports to the Board of Supervisors. But there's a lot more complexities associated with the housing authority. And I guess I just have a question for staff. In looking at them, is the feeling from the staff standpoint that trying to create a housing authority, given the fact that it would have to have a referendum of the voters, but trying to create a housing authority, does it not provide that significant of benefits? It seemed to me that the funding sources would still primarily be the existing sources that the James City County uses, and there might be maybe some additional grants available, but I don't know. I'd be curious to get a staff assessment of just overall what the thoughts are on whether housing authority in James City County would be worth the time and effort to try to make it happen, or if the benefits are not worth that time and effort. And maybe I'll put Vaughn on the spot since nobody's jumping in there.
Hi, Rich. I think we did take a deep look at this, and there was a staff paper put forth. Our opinion is that when you look at how housing authorities are implemented today in the Commonwealth, you are actually introducing another layer that is not necessarily going to bring any additional revenue to your property. Housing authorities to date are spending more time managing properties that they own or reconfiguring and redeveloping those properties. There is not, in the recent past 20 years, been any additional funding to allow them to do what their original role was. A lot of this has to do with the rollback of the Kelso case, where eminent domain was curtailed. So you've not seen that. What you are seeing now in the Commonwealth, if you look at what's going on in Norfolk with their redevelopment and in Richmond, they are actually redeveloping properties that they own and control.
Okay. Thank you. And I see Mr. Holt had his hand up as well to add to that conversation.
Well, I did. It was such a good answer. I lowered my hand. I'm not sure I have much more to add. You know, I do think a couple of months back, staff had reported back to the board on some of the recommendations of the Workforce Housing Task Force that were designed to further the efforts at providing housing that's affordable to those making those workforce price points. There were a number of ones in there that would not be as, I think, labor or as time intensive. You know, fundamentally, I think you saw in there, housing authorities are a political subdivision of the state. They are their own reporting body led by their own board of directors. And so, you know, much like Vaughn said, I won't re-echo all of that. He had some really good points. They're sort of maintaining what they already own. It's just their evolution is really sort of changing. And I think the Workforce Housing Task Force did just such an admirable job coming up with just a great suite of tools in the toolbox. I think many of those have, in the grand scheme of things, significantly more potential to move the ball, if you will, in terms of providing housing at those price points here in the county, probably as that would be more effective than going down the path of a housing authority.
Yeah, that's sort of, from just my personal viewpoint, that's sort of the conclusion I was reaching after I read the materials that you all provided. I do believe Williamsburg, the city of Williamsburg, still has a housing authority, and I don't know how old that is, but yeah, I had that same reaction. So thanks to Paul and Vaughn for clarifying and laying out very succinctly the pros and cons of that. Any other comments on either the housing authority background paper or short-term rentals or anything else in this particular packet referring to housing? All right. Well, in that case, thank you all very much for your feedback. Thanks to Vaughn and his associates for the time, and we'll now move on to the next section, which is the community character chapter, unless there's any hanging items that staff needed clarification on from the working group on housing. Anything, Ginny?
Sorry, I just wondered, was there going to be any discussion of the short-term rentals?
Yeah, that's what I asked if anybody wanted to, and I didn't see well, now Tim has a hand up on short-term, I believe. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was of the same. I thought we were going to have a discussion about short terms as a part of it. And if not, you know, I would like to get Vaughn's input before he jumps off the call as to what his thoughts are on, you know, given what he talked about with the starter homes and the like. I would like to get Vaughn's input on short-term rentals on the housing supply in James City County.
Okay, and Paul also had a hand up, so let me defer to Paul for a minute, and before Vaughn comes in on the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to put in a quick plug. If we have not yet gotten an opportunity to see your results from the survey questions that were a little questionnaire that was included in the packet, please get those sent in. Would love to have all 8 of you getting those back into us so that we can add those to the results. So thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, and actually, I'm one of the ones, I filled it out, but I had so many questions where I was undecided that I wanted to wait and hear how this discussion unfolded, and then I will get mine in. But that was one of the reasons that I didn't submit mine, is that I didn't feel like I had a definitive enough answer for all of those questions. Ellen?
Yes, I was just going to say if the group would like to, I could kind of run through I know you all likely saw the email that Brett sent out, but if you wanted me to try to summarize it piece by piece, I could, and invite discussion along the way. Or if you would like to just come back to it during the next review, and in the meantime, kind of submit your thoughts. Either one is fine with staff.
Okay. Well, let me, since Tim has an open question to Vaughn, let me see if Vaughn has anything to add. And then, Ellen, I would like to have you follow with sort of the synopsis of Brett's email.
Thank you, Mr.
That's all right with everybody. Okay.
So Marion and I did look through the literature at the impact of short-term rentals, and it was part of, I think, to a paper that we that's in the material. Overall, we've not seen where there's been a proliferation of short-term rentals in the areas where there's existing the older housing stock. And from the outlines of what we've seen, where people are talking about their permissibility being having some sunset and being near arterial roads, I do think that that's probably proper. One of the things that Marion and I started talking about is if we started limiting the ability, because we were saying that this particular structure could possibly serve, from our opinion, a higher use as an affordable structure to be put into the housing stock, then we would want to be careful that we not place ourselves in a disparate impact. Whereas if that particular housing stock resides in an area that it is also typically African American and lower moderate income, would we then be saying, your house is better used to be filter house and not as a short-term rental? So I think that's something we want to keep abreast of. Other than that, either from the literature and so far from what we've seen by here, we've not seen it be a detriment. We are seeing it there's a lot of talk around high income areas where it seemed to be extractive, the Bay Area, DC, New York. We don't seem to be configured for that currently.
Okay. Thank you. I know one of the and it may be a moot point, one of the issues that consistently comes up when the Planning Commission hears a legislative case for a short-term rental is always the sunset clause issue. That, the concern about it conveying with the property and what might be a responsible owner initially, when the house or the property changes hands a few times, there's no guarantee that that same level of maintenance and upkeep and responsibility will remain. And so I know that consistently comes up at the meetings, but that's just an aside.
I don't think that we seen anything that talks about whether that should convey. It would seem to me, from my opinion, that it would not be too great an impediment to have a new owner come and reapply for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments on the short-term rentals? Tim, and then Frank.
So, no, thanks. No, Vaughn, I appreciate your comments. I operate on the premise a little bit, and certainly the way our ordinance is written and the way governing documents tend to be written in our homeowners associations, that most of what we're seeing coming forth for these applications are homes that are not in HOAs because they are precluded by the governing documents or by zoning. So do you see a threshold in this workforce affordable housing of HOA fees that makes homes inside an HOA unaffordable? So I mean, it's just my premise. When going back to the current housing opportunity policy, we had a lot of discussions about that, because I don't think living inside of a Kings Mill or a Ford's Colony, it really adds to the affordability of a home. So, and this kind of ties into Jack's comments earlier about what are we willing to accept as a community, meaning if we're going to create these affordable communities, are we willing to forego some of the open space, some of the recreation, some of those other requirements that just drive those costs up? So it's a long-winded question just to ask Vaughn if he and his team see some sort of threshold as a monthly fee for homeowners associations that push it over the cusp of being affordable.
So, Mr. Connor, I can talk to you from the experience in both our development of the Ironbound Square neighborhood, Toano Trace, and most recently Forest Heights and Neighbors Drive. In all of those developments, there are HOA fees, and it is a matter of the cost of the fee, the monthly or annual cost. When in all those developments, they were set very low. In Neighbors Drive and Forest Heights, there is a small piece of common area that their HOA is not started yet because they're still building there. In the discussions that we've had with those residents, they're going to try their best not to have a fee, because the only thing that they're having to maintain is that common area, which is open. So it's just a matter of cutting it. And one of the members volunteering to do it now. In Ironbound Square, I don't know what their current assessment, what their fees are. They were started at a very low, I want to say around $24. I think it was $24 a quarter. I do believe they're higher than that now. So, Toano Trace, it's been a while. I think their HOA has gone dormant, and that is, I think, what you would expect to see in neighborhoods where you're doing low and moderate income housing with an HOA fee. Most of Toano Trace did have a small park area to maintain on top of, I believe it was 2 BMPs. So, I think they're both dry BMPs. So the BMPs and the maintenance of the small recreation areas tend to be the cost factors there. And I think when you have those neighborhoods where the children age out, and if you tend to have people who don't use the amenities, the park amenities, then there is a loss of, they're not valued. And so when they degrade, And then people ask, well, what am I spending my money on? That's been the experience that I've observed. With respect to HOP, it became very hard to understand how to price in HOA fees when looking at cost, because they vary. I do believe at the higher end, they are an impediment to affordability. It's not something that we've not been able to pinpoint where the point is. Is it $60 a year or $10 a month? We don't know. We haven't been able to study to that extent yet.
Thank you, Bon. Frank, you had your hand up, and then Dr. Rose also had a comment. So we'll start with Frank and then Rob.
I asked the question of staff on the issue of sunset, and specifically, I was looking at the tourist homes for R2 and R8, which are SUPs, which I've kind of narrowed it down to those because those are the arterial or non-arterial ones that we have. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, is your reply said that from a legal point of view, we'd have to go to the legislature to be able to do that. Am I correct?
Correct. That is the current interpretation of the county attorney, that we cannot do sunset clauses on these.
So it struck me that the only other alternative was to change the zoning ordinance for R2 and R8 for tourist homes and say they're not permitted. Is that possible?
Sure.
So that's the alternative we have to this issue, or just, as Jack pointed out, just live with the fact that it has to be on arterial, and that's it. I mean, that's what I think it's come down to.
Well, there's one other. I don't know what to make of this, frankly. This is a question, not a statement. But people who live in homes and rent out rooms, or maybe they just vacate their house for 3 or 4 days at a time, rent it, and then move back in, are to me one class of owner of short-term rentals. And the others who just buy a home and never live in it, and they simply rent it out short-term. And we had a case like that, you may recall, over by the airport earlier this year, or last year, I guess it was. The former, I think, has the opportunity to make homes more affordable. A person who's living in the house and is renting out a couple of rooms is going to get some income, and maybe that enables that person to live in a house that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. The other one is simply an investment opportunity, and that, which is nothing wrong with investment opportunities, but that takes a house off the market for a permanent resident and turns it into a short-term rental. And depending on the price range of that house, it could remove a house from the affordable inventory. Is there a way to think through that, or does that have some validity to divide the two up like that, or? Hello?
I think I mean, I'll leave it to staff, but I think our ordinance currently allows that if you live in the home, you can rent rooms in the house.
Oh, no, that's right. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
Correct. And I think, sorry, this is Paul. So one of the questions on the little questionnaire we sent out was exactly to that, was how important is it to you, or rather, should the owner continue to live there or have that be their primary residence? So, definitely once we get all of the survey responses in, as you saw in the preliminary release today, Brett set out the responses received to date. I think once we get all those and we're able to digest those, we will, as Ellen mentioned, we'll bring those back to you for sort of that deeper dive as part of the next round of these discussions.
All right, and Rob's been waiting patiently in the wings for a while. Let me give him the floor now.
Thanks, except I think Jack kind of stole my thunder. I was actually just going to ask whether a lot of the issues with affordable housing in the short-term rental market is external to the house that has the short-term rental. And my question was, and I think Jack sort of answered it, was, does the ability to rent out a room when you're living there potentially make housing more affordable for that person? It sounds like the answer. It could be potentially yes.
All right, Jenny?
Thanks, Rich. I'm afraid I'm going to digress a little bit from this short-term rentals and just put in a pitch for a subject that I've worried about ever since the Housing Task Force days, which is an appeal to include something in the comprehensive plan that specifically deals with mobile home parks. The zoning on some of them actually does not permit any residential uses. In most cases, they are, or in many cases, they are eyesores. And when we start talking about community character and affordable housing, we could include conversations about manufactured housing, which can be quite affordable and, believe it or not, quite attractive. And I know that this is like the thorniest of thorny problems, and I do not wish to understate that. At the same time, we keep talking about, you know, how beautiful the county is, and you go down these lovely roads. Well, some of these lovely roads have really ugly parts to them that are falling apart mobile homes. And I just think we do ourselves a disservice to not mention it or grapple with it. So that's my little soapbox for today.
Okay.
Second that.
Thank you. And Barbara Null submitted a comment about if someone owns a home outside of an HOA, how are they subject to these regulations? And Paul, if I could just ask you from an overarching planning, you know, there's the matrix for the various zoning districts and the uses that are permissible or not permissible, but you could probably answer Barbara's question much better than I can. So if I could ask you to weigh in on that.
No, I do think you hit that point exactly. It's whether or not the zoning ordinance permits them as a matter of right, in which case there is no special approvals. You just come in and register for your business license with the Commissioner of the Revenue, or you know, sort of regulated through the special use permit process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Frank and Rob, I see both your hands are still up. I didn't know if you had not finished with your comments. If you hadn't, my apologies for interrupting. Frank?
Sorry, I didn't drop my hand. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want to, I wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting anybody off. Okay. Any other comments or issues now on the short-term housing policy? And we will all get our surveys in. And to Ellen, before we leave this, because Ellen's going to go through Brett's memo, but we will be coming back for more detailed discussions. This is just the first cut at the housing section. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's right. We can certainly update the summary once everyone submitted theirs. And if you all would like to just wait, I can, you know, defer that to the future meeting to go through, you know, sort of the patterns that we're seeing.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And, you know, this is sort of this process that the way I'm looking at it anyway, is that we received the initial packet on a chapter, and this is the good opportunity. We've had we're having a really great discussion where we're bringing up some concerns, and, you know, those concerns and issues will be revisited when this chapter comes up for more detailed discussion. Like in many cases, the GSAs haven't been updated from the existing comprehensive plan. And so, there will be the ability to get more into very specific items to address that should be, included as a goal, a strategy, or an action. Am I reading that correctly, Ellen?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on housing before we move to community character? All right. Turn it over to staff for the community character team then.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm Tori Haynes, and with me today is my colleague, Jose Ribeiro. Together, we'll be presenting the Community Character Chapter. Next slide. Most of today's presentation is based on information that can be found in the technical report. Staff will then briefly present information regarding community guidance, design guidelines, and the GSAs. Next slide. The character of James City County is important to its citizens and to the business community, and has contributed to the county's attractiveness and growth through the years. According to the 2019 Citizens Survey, preserving the nature of the area and its quality of life remains a high priority. In the county, important elements that are related to community character include community character corridors, community character areas, special places, neighborhoods, and community appearance, and historic preservation, utility lines, and communication facilities. Next slide. CCCs are roads previously designated as Greenbelt roads, described in the 1991 comp plan as entrance corridors and roads which promoted the rural, natural, or historic character of the county. These roads were designated as CCCs in 1997, defining standards and providing guidelines for how corridor buffers are to be treated during development and how to preserve the unique character along these key corridors. CCCs have three types of designations: open agricultural, wooded, and urban suburban. Next slide. Open agricultural CCCs are located primarily in rural lands where farming and forestry activities are predominant. The viewshed and integrity of farm fields and natural open spaces should be preserved so they remain the dominant visual features. An example would be Forge Road. Wooded CCCs are characterized as having wooded areas along the road with light to moderate traffic and minimal commercial development. Existing vegetation should be preserved or supplemented to create a wooded buffer that preserves open space and wildlife habitat. The buffer should visually screen the development from the road to maintain the natural character of the county. Example is Western Monticello Avenue. Urban suburban CCCs are characterized as having high to moderate traffic, commercial uses, and some residential uses. Predominant visual character should be the built environment and natural landscape. Buffers should incorporate existing and new vegetation, berms, and other desirable design features to complement and enhance the visual quality of the corridor. An example is Richmond Road along the premium outlets. Next slide. During the 1997 comprehensive plan process, certain areas of James City County were confirmed as important places during the public participation process. Guidelines for future development were created for these areas. There are currently 5 CCAs: Toano, Norge, the Jamestown Green Springs area, Newtown, and Five Forks. Next slide. Toano still retains much of the village character that led to its designation as a CCA. Design guidelines were adopted by the Board of Supervisors in 2006, which highlight improvements and plans for the Toano area and give guidance for all future developments inside the CCA. Norge's early 20th century village character along Richmond Road has been visually impacted by automobile-oriented development. Many original buildings from the early 1900s were demolished for the widening of Richmond Road in the 1960s. The comprehensive plan provides design standards intended to guide future development and redevelopment in Norge, but formal guidelines have not been adopted in the same way as Toano. Next slide. The Jamestown Green Springs area has unique opportunities for historic and environmental preservation, as well as economic development. An update to the 2009 Shaping Our Shores Master Plan for Jamestown Beach and the Marina was approved by the Board of Supervisors earlier this year. The area designated as the Newtown CCA is mostly the same area shown on the adopted master plan for Newtown. However, some parcels located within the CCA are not part of the Newtown master plan or subject to the same proffers. In order to maintain a unifying look and feel, the adopted design guidelines for the Newtown master plan are encouraged for all proposed developments within the CCA. Next slide. Five Forks still retains elements of a village character, including 2 original buildings dating to the early 1900s. In 2004, the Board of Supervisors adopted the primary principles for Five Forks in order to preserve and build upon the many positive qualities of the area, including protecting Powhatan and Mill Creek watersheds and safeguarding the village character. Next slide. Three special places have also been identified for their contributions to the greater community: Grove, Croker, and Forge Road. Grove is a community in the southeastern portion of the county, valued for its historic, cultural, and agricultural roots. Historic sites in Grove related to Virginia's colonial past include the archaeological site of Woolstenholme and Carter's Grove Plantation. Grove eventually became the largest African-American community in the county and was commemorated with a historical highway marker in 2013. While much of Croker is now within York River State Park, the remaining area is divided among residential, farming, and woodland areas. The Croker community includes many historic resources, including Croker Landing and Riverview Plantation. Forge Road is well known for its larger pastoral parcels, used primarily for agricultural purposes. Next slide.
Continuing public input shows that many residents value the history and culture of the area, as well as the small town and friendly atmosphere the county offers. Elements of development can reflect these characteristics that help making James City County a special place for its residents. Elements such as preservation of trees and shrubs during development, large shade trees that canopy over the road and sidewalk, and reduction or elimination of light pollution to protect night sky views. Staff expect further significant changes to sections related to community appearance and development, as well as to the community character design guidelines as part of this update process. Preparation of these guidelines is part of the consultant team's scope of work for this comprehensive plan update and will be a part of moving forward the preferred future scenario. Next, please. The county has a comprehensive and extensive set of regulations to preserve vegetation. Some of the zoning ordinance requirements that help the county preserve vegetation during development include CCCs and right-of-way landscape requirements. When development occurs along a right-of-way, landscape buffers directly adjacent to the right-of-way are required to be preserved or installed. Transitional screening. When development occurs adjacent to a conflicting land use and or conflicting zoning districts. Perimeter buffers. Provision of a landscape buffer along the side and rear perimeters of parcels located in commercial or industrial districts. Phase clearing plan to minimize the size of areas of land to be cleared at once. Outstanding specimen tree designation allow developers to gain credits towards fulfilling tree planting requirements. Tree protection and criteria for removal. The ordinance establishes criteria and standards for the protection of existing trees during development. Next, please. So the county is known for its diverse wealth of nationally significant historic and archaeological resources. Currently, the county has 18 properties on the National Register of Historic Places and or the Virginia Landmarks Register. The newest addition to these registers is the Toronto Commercial Historic District. The county archaeological policy was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in 1998 and converted to an ordinance in 2018. Next, please. Additional studies that have been prepared to identify and evaluate the archaeological and historical resources in the county include toward a resource protection process, preserving our hidden heritage, and architectural survey. The Historical Commission was established by the Board of Supervisors in July 8, 1985 to document, commemorate, preserve, and promote public interest in the history and historic legacy of the county. The commission is made by members appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Typical projects include funding new historic highway markers, presenting annual historic preservation awards, and commissioning architectural or archaeological studies of important sites. Next, please. The placement of utility lines and communication facilities are also important elements that can contribute and impact the character of an area. Currently, many utilities are placed underground or substantially screened for safety reasons around the county. In 1998, the increasing need for new wireless communication facilities prompted the county to establish a new division in the zoning ordinance to address them, along with the performance standards for wireless communication facilities policy. The county continues to adopt regulations for approving communication facilities to meet state and federal requirements. Next, please. Some examples of spotlight and implementation for community character. The Pocahontas Trail Corridor Study engaged the community to identify key transportation needs and define a vision for the future of the corridor. Underground utilities along Longview Road, concurrently with the Phase 1 widening project, allowing efficient use of resources and promoting community character while also stabilizing utility services for residents. Funding was also approved for similar improvements along Croker Road, which are in the process of coming to fruition. These include a road widening from 2 to 4 lanes, with a new 2-lane bridge parallel to the existing bridge over the CSX line to accommodate additional travel lanes. Next, please. The next 2 slides summarizes the public input most directly related to the community character chapter that has been reviewed so far. Excuse me. So the first slide shows the responses from the 2019 citizen survey. Through the survey and the first round of public engagement, one of the themes that most directly relates to this chapter is respondents ranked it very important or somewhat important to protect and preserve the county's rural character. Next, please. As a follow-up to the survey, the county hosted the Engage 2045 Summit on the Future to engage with citizens to determine their vision for the future of the county. 90% of respondents indicated that it was very important or somewhat important to do more to improve our efforts to protect and preserve our rural character in the county. Next, please. For this initial review, the goals, the strategies, and actions adopted as part of the Towards 2035 Leading the Way comprehensive plan have not been revised. The staff is exploring potential revisions, and members of the Planning Commission Working Group are welcome to comment on GSA revision and to provide suggestions for questions to include in the next round of public input. Next, please. This concludes our review of the Community Character Technical Report, Community Guidance, design guidelines, goals, strategies, and actions. And we look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Is anybody there?
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my fault. I was on mute. I wanted to just mention in regards to Jose's question about potential action items or areas to work towards, talking about preserving scenic view sheds. And earlier this year, or probably last year, there was a case that came before the Planning Commission where there was a property on Forge Road that had a conservation easement on it, and the property owner proposed amending the ordinance to, or amending the conservation easement to allow to roll in a second parcel that he owned, and cutting to the chase. The bottom line was one of the new conditions was that there would be a building setback of 400 feet along the road that had to remain as open space. And I guess what I'm getting at is I'd like to see maybe some work done to look at other scenic areas in the county, scenic roadways, whether that be Croker Road, Forge Road, whatever, to see whether there's some way to put a scenic overlay over it that would extend a building setback beyond what the ordinance for that zoning district would normally require. And, realizing that it could be a very complex issue, compensating landowners if you don't allow them to build up to, closer than 400 or 600 or some other distance. But anyway, that's my 2 cents that I'd like to explore in more detail, whether there's certain scenic roadways in the county that would benefit from a scenic overlay. Ellen?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to mention that your comments and then some other similar comments from PCWG members that we'd received earlier regarding buffers and setbacks and preservation of open space. We've definitely heard you all, and we are in the process of finalizing some information to include with your next packet that will go out with the land use chapter materials. So if you would be okay with deferring at least some of that discussion, we should be able to provide you a little bit of background information to assist with that.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Any other comments from working group members, suggestions, comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment. I don't know where I'm going with this really, but a quote from the technical report: places such as Norge, Tuano, Grove, Five Forks, and Jamestown bring to mind separate, identifiable areas of the county. Is that a goal? Is that something we want to continue in each case? The existing comprehensive plan and comments on Norge that that's no longer true. It states in the comprehensive plan that the early 20th century village character of its Norge's business and residential areas along Richmond Road has been visually impacted by automobile-oriented infill development. Also, newer development from the east has substantially blurred the distinction between Norge and Lightfoot. So, that statement isn't entirely accurate. But more importantly, is that a goal for these 5 in particular. And as we get into more discussions of UDAs, how much separation should we have if we're going to create new UDAs along the way, that kind of thing.
And I think that's a good discussion item. I do think, I don't know, I think it's desirable in some cases, and I think you have to look at the areas themselves, because yes, to the east of Norge, for example, it is running more into Lightfoot, but between Norge and Toano, there is a better delineation. And, one could probably argue that community character, the appearance of quaintness or a village concept in certain areas could be very desirable. And I know that in Toano, for example, they are now a Main Street affiliate. And so they're working with the Virginia and the U.S. Main Street program to try to bring about the sort of look that exists in other communities in Virginia, like Orange and Madison, I guess, out in the western part of the state. So I personally think it's worth a discussion, and I personally think that it is a worthwhile goal for some of the communities to maybe allow that buffering around them. Just my personal feeling on that.
Mm-hmm.
Frank?
Are we open to discussion on the community character guideline paper, or are we still talking about the briefing?
I think we're open at this point, Frank.
Okay, let me just plow in here. First off, is I've had a problem trying to understand place types that we've been using in the future land use map. And what the guideline paper talks about is moving away from the way we look at the current land use map of MI or whatever, and then going to a place type. And as we've done the surveys on 2 different occasions, what we get is a place type that talks about a housing area or a mixed use or a community, not a community, an RMD, a high density or a low density area, and then they show you some pictures. And my reaction is not dissimilar to Mike Hippel's, is that's not Williamsburg, because what you saw didn't strike him that way. And so the idea of the guidelines appeals to me because it starts to talk about what those place types could be if you consider the notion of form-based coding and place types, which specifies exactly what those areas are going to look like Toano as a hamlet with specific things of how much open space it will be, what kind of housing you could have in there, upstairs, downstairs. It's almost like saying we're going to take a template of Newtown called mixed use and say the area around Anderson Corner is going to be like Newtown. Well, I don't think so. It's the definition of what that mixed use area would look like that goes back to the UDA piece that Jack talked about. So I would really appreciate, as we look at this migration to place types and the aligning of the different guidelines that we have that Jose just talked about, that we're a little bit more definitive in the next round when we go back to the community about the place types and talk about what that may mean. So, for example, our current zoning allows us to have a developer, Tim's point about open space, that they can count the RPA areas. But they never do anything with it. They don't necessarily put any paths or anything like that around it, unlike the Oakland Point that did trails around that. So you could specify exactly the amount of open space that isn't inclusive of the RPA to be able to open up the development. You could, as we do right now, about parking spaces, to make sure that if you do something of that kind of a development, that in fact it has the parking spaces in there, as opposed to us going back and forth in the Forest Hill one, back and forth on that. So that when a developer comes and says, I want to build something here, instead of he or she telling us what an eastern state is going to look like another new town, we say, no, this place type defines exactly the amount of what we want for parking, open space, and where we're headed, which is a different approach. It essentially says that we're going to look at a community character and the preservation of an area as it transforms over time within a guideline called place types, so that we don't get into these conversations about the Croker Road corridor, or not the Croker Road corridor, the corridor leading into Tohano, and what Tohano is going to look like and what Andersonville. We've already kind of said that this is what we want to do in those areas, so that you can get to the issue of traffic as opposed to arguing about what's there. You get the community character issue, which is a little broader than what we've been talking about. So I think that as we go forward here, this community character chapter and the future land use and what those place types actually mean need a little bit more discussion within the framework that's been proposed within that paper, so that we're explicit about the role of place types and community character.
And so essentially, just for clarification, Frank, you're saying the 5 community character areas that we have in the county could benefit from their own set of design and development
The
guidelines.
Croker one was the perfect one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Croker one was absolutely absolutely perfect.
Tohano, the design guidelines as well.
Exactly. I mean, and so what you're doing is making sure that the corridors and the look of those place types that you want to put together. So when the discussion is going to come down to the Anderson core business and how you've got the Getty properties who have a conservation easement, but yet we want to put a goddamn mixed use in that triangle. You got to be kidding me.
We're going to have to censor bleep that one out, Frank.
Okay, but if you tell me that the mixed use is going to look like this and consistent with the Whitehall and the rural character of the county, that's a different conversation. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the Croker interchange.
I personally think that would be a great discussion item to pursue. And, on even a micro level, some communities like the Ghent area in Norfolk, they have pattern books that specify everything from windows, gives a variety of choices for window styles, door styles, trim on buildings, and so on and so forth. And of course, that's much more detailed. But it's the fact that the point I'm making is some communities, some jurisdictions do try to your point, manage how the development will occur, what it will look like, and shape the community character that way. So
a little truth in lending here, just to make sure we're straight, is I didn't come by this idea by myself. It was Paul. And Paul in the strategic plan piece put in operational initiatives to facilitate the zoning rework and the form-based coding and the approach. And so what's in this guideline is the first step to move us to that direction, which Paul's had in mind for a number of years. Okay. I'm just here to endorse the idea that when we start making this discussion to the community and community character and what we're talking about the land use map, is that it becomes a little clearer that what we're trying to do is find a way to preserve as well as transform the community over time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the intent of what Paul has in mind.
Good, thank you. And I think Ellen's going to jump in and clarify or elaborate a little bit more. Ellen?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words, and then if other staff have anything to add. I guess just to the point you were just making is to think about as a group kind of what belongs where, and kind of along the lines of the guidelines may accomplish certain things, but then there may be a broader set of items that help get us towards the goals you all have, such as the zoning ordinance, which may have some more detail perhaps than the guidelines would, or I don't know if it would be like a pattern book, but there may be other types of guidance that would be part of the picture. So I guess just wanted to boil that down to say it may end up that there's a suite of different tools, and the guidelines play one role in that, but maybe don't encompass every element.
Okay, good. Thanks for that clarification, Ellen. Any other comments on the community character chapter?
Just one addition is I absolutely agree. It's a toolbox like you do with most of the things that you have for policy. Yep. And it's just another tool here that you all are trying to put in. Thank you, Ellen.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I see, let's see, Ginny.
Just a very quick note. When you mentioned pattern books, it came to my mind that the Workforce Housing Task Force report, actually as one of the secondary recommendations on the housing preservation side, talked about the possibility of developing pattern books for, particular areas. Oh. So that's, we've already been thinking about that here in James City County.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Jenny. Frank, did you have another comment?
No, I didn't. Oh, there it is. I lowered my hand.
Okay, Tim.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one piece. We talked a little bit in here about having tree-lined streets and, arching over the roadways. And, just from a practical perspective, when we get into some of these communities that have alleyways with rear-loaded garages and narrow streets, we create this expectation from a landscape plan that it's going to have a certain, call it old town look, if you will. But the reality is there are no front yards. We're putting trees in that are heaving, as they grow, they heave sidewalks, they heave curbs. In some cases, they're VDOT's responsibility. In other cases, they're an HOA responsibility. So as we get into this, I'd like us to really get Scott White's input into sort of that landscape piece, because there's not one size fits all in this. We get some of these narrow streets, and then the fire department comes through, and then they come back and say, oh, you need to limit all these trees up to 16 feet. These are just things that I've run into in the past year around town. And while it creates a pretty picture, it's sometimes really impractical in its application.
Well, that's a good caution, and that's something that, as we work forward in trying to refine the community characters, these are things that we need to take into consideration. Certainly, that's for sure. Like in downtown Toano, of course, trees are not that much of an item, but there is this goal of having, for the existing old buildings that are there, have reduced setbacks so that they're closer to a sidewalk and it's more of a walkable community, and you can put trees in a median that divides the roadway or something like that. But to your point, Tim, I think, we can't just be looking through rose-colored glasses, but we need to take some of the practical considerations into account as well. All right. Any other comments on the community character section? All right. Well, I think staff has enough to go with on both chapters, I think, based on our discussion. Couple other items for discussion that I wanted to bring up. First of all, in the beginning of the meeting, when we approved the minutes, I should have stipulated that it was the October 5th PC working group meeting minutes. So just a correction, you know, when these minutes get produced. Also, I don't want to lose sight of the fact in the cover memo that came out for today's meeting, there were several suggestions in their follow-up on what the consultants had addressed in regard to our feedback. For example, looking at strategies and goals that crossed over several different areas, and they proposed an X and a Y axis that might be able to track this. And of course, these are all fairly time consuming, but I don't want to lose track of that when there's these suggestions that are put in the cover memo. I want to make sure that we either address them or that staff is going to come back with maybe some more refinement on that. But this particular cover memo that Ellen wrote had a lot of very specific information in there that I don't want us to lose sight of. Frank?
I do have on the linking of the GSAs and the strategic plan piece, obviously. And what I'm reminded of is when we've gone back to the board and I've listened to the board's comments about the comp plan, I'm always reminded of the fact that one of the supervisors is concerned about the affordability of it. And it's a legitimate concern when you have aspirations versus what you want to do in a budget, especially what we may be going through in the next 4 years or so. And so I think it's very useful that what the team has suggested is a good first cut to get to that issue and concern that we're going to have, not only with the board members, but citizens, where we may be suggesting an aspiration that we think ought to be funded. And we've got that from the PDR program as an example, and some of the things we even discussed this evening that, are citizens willing to pay for those? So I think it's a very helpful exercise that they do that connection as best as they can, so that the GSAs and what the taxpayers, citizens, or the board may decide has some sense of what the priorities were in all the number of things that cut across, so that at least what I think they're suggesting is that there may be some prioritization criteria that get to the gap analysis about what citizens think we're doing well, but are concerned we're not doing enough, whether it's housing or preserving and protecting the environment or some of the transportation. So I think it would be a very useful exercise for them to do that, as well as I think there's a suggestion of a drill that was done in the strategic plan that allows the citizens to state their own priorities of what they think about these different alternatives for it. And so you get a coalescing, if you will, over what the priorities are, with the implications of what they may mean for staff input, resources, time, et cetera. And so I'm absolutely convinced that linking makes sense, especially with at least a bit of a crosswalk that I've done back and forth between the old strategic plan and the GSAs, and how helpful that has been to the staff to be able to get funding and resourcing, besides funding, resourcing to be able to do these actions. So I'm very supportive of what they proposed.
I am as well. That the idea that certain action items benefit multiple areas could actually even certainly result in cost efficiencies, if not some actual cost savings. So I agree with your comments 100%, Frank. Thank you. Jack? You're still muted, Jack.
Sorry. I was intrigued by the multimodal piece that was in there. I thought maybe it was better suited for transportation, but still, the way it's supposed to work, I guess, or at least the way you're supposed to look at it, according to this material, was on a regional scale. The multimodal system plan, the plan for it, identifies where people are coming from and going to, what roads, trails, transit routes they take from beginning to end, and what critical links are missing. Are we going to do that? Is that going to be part of this endeavor?
Ellen?
Sounds like a lot of work, but.
Yeah, so I believe, Mr. Haldeman, you're referring to some information in the community character about
exactly.
Yeah, okay. I don't believe that during this plan effort we would be doing all of that. I think it's something we wanted to highlight as maybe goal is the wrong word, but something to continue to look at and be aware of, is that there's those guidelines out there that can help us shape our tools going forward.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other comments? Jack, did you have another one, or just your hand?
No, I'm there.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other comments, I think we had some very good discussion on the two chapters. Just some administrative notes. Staff proposed the idea of coming up with a Planning Commission working group email, similar to the Planning Commission, as an email address group. And if you all don't have any objections, that by having a PC working group email, that would bring Ginny into it. And, when we respond, she would automatically be included in all of that. And so if there's no objections, I think I'll ask staff to proceed with the idea of a group email for PCWG.
Thank you.
Okay.
Here.
All righty. The only other administrative note that I have is to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving before I open it up to anybody else who has any last minute discussion items before we wrap our meeting up. Okay. All right. Well, it's definitely going to be a different year for everybody as far as Thanksgiving goes, but please, I hope everybody stays safe and has a very happy holiday. And on that note, may I have a motion to adjourn to the December 7th Planning Commission Working Group meeting at 4 p.m.?
Julie,
so move.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you all very much, and have a